Welcome to the Film Trooper podcast with your host, Scott McMahon.
Hi, and welcome to the Film Trooper podcast, Filmmaking Freedom for the Independent. This is a podcast where we focus on making and selling your film for online self-distribution. A perfect way to get started is to pick up the book, How to Make and Sell Your Film Online and Survive the Hollywood Implosion while doing it. It's available as a paperback, in Kindle ebook, as well as an audiobook. In fact, you can get the audiobook for free when you go to survivetheimplosion.com. When you go to that link, you can sign up with Audible for their free trial and get the book for free. Again, that's at survivetheimplosion.com. Today's episode is a rebroadcast of my interview with Stephanie Palmer, author of Good in a Room and a former studio executive who has sat in over 3,000 pitches in her lifetime. You'll hear in this interview that I referenced some events that took place a few years back, but that doesn't take away from the valuable information that Stephanie will share with us in this episode. So without further ado, by the way, I took this saying from Jeff Goldsmith over at the Q&A podcast, and who used to produce the Creative Screenwriting podcast. Anyway, this is my homage to Jeff's saying, so without further ado, here is the rebroadcast episode with Stephanie Palmer here on the Film Trooper podcast. Today, my guest is Stephanie Palmer of Good in a Room. It's a book, and it's a website, and it's a teaching resource for filmmakers, especially screenwriters. Now, Stephanie was the former director of creative affairs for MGM, so she actually sat in on well over 3,000 pitches. So she's very astute to understanding what works and what doesn't work when you're trying to, well, pitch your idea. So Stephanie teaches not only screenwriters, but also business people how to better pitch their presentations to anyone, basically a buyer. So she kind of breaks it up in her book like you are the seller and they are the buyers. And there's a different type of relationship, and understanding how that works and how best to prepare for your pitch will garner you the best chance for success. So she's been involved with developing Legally Blonde, 21. She's worked on Armageddon. One of her first jobs is actually, you'll hear about it later, was working on Titanic. But I think she had a lot of fun working on 21 because she got to sit on a pitch with Kevin Spacey. And also, they together worked for over 2 years on that particular project as she was the point executive for MGM. Anyhow, so this is huge because you got to think, like, we're all filmmakers and we kind of want to know, like, what's behind that closed door? What really goes on? If we had some inside information, could we be more successful? Could we, have a better shot of getting our project out there? And so now we have access to someone like Stephanie who will tell you, who will actually teach you. You can hire her to be your coach. I mean, you can get like one-on-one training from someone who's been in the trenches in the Hollywood system and can give you all the tricks and tips of how to succeed. But I was really curious about Stephanie because I actually heard about her through the online entrepreneurs and bloggers I follow. And she was on Chris Ducker's podcast. Chris Ducker is a new business podcast, and he runs Virtual Freedom. He just came up with this book called Virtual Freedom, and he's been on this book tour. And he's all about outsourcing or utilizing virtual assistants or assistants to better maximize your time efficiency as a business CEO for any type of solopreneur or any type of business you're going to get into. And I had a chance to meet Chris Ducker at the World Domination Summit these past 2 weekends up here in Portland, Oregon. So when we got talking, he was mentioning to me that his most favorite podcast interview he's done so far has been with Stephanie. He was really just jazzed about it. And then Stephanie was also on Jesse Eichmann's Business of Film podcast. And she really gives some good information on that particular podcast. So I think it's really important that you actually listen to Chris Ducker's interview of Stephanie Palmer, as well as Jesse Eichmann's Business of Film podcast interview of Stephanie, as well as I found a really great presentation she did at Google about 2 years ago, and I'll also link that up into the show notes. So in the show notes, you'll get a link to Chris Ducker's podcast interview, as well as the Business of Film interview, as well as the presentation she gave at Google. So I really think it's really informative about who Stephanie is, what tremendous value she provides, And so I didn't want to get too much into the stuff that she's already talked about. I really wanted to get into more about how she has transitioned from going from Hollywood to running her own online business. And that's sort of the whole goal of what Film Trooper is about, is to teach independent filmmakers that your film is only one part of it. It's really almost like an advertisement for you're selling something else, and what you're selling it'll be a larger scale at a larger price point, but you need to know some online entrepreneurial skills to do that. And Stephanie's actually doing that. And so that's kind of really why I was jazzed to talk to her about it. But you'll listen to this interview and you'll hear that it's mostly just a conversation. Just had a really great time connecting and talking with her, and feel really honored that she's on today's episode. So without further ado, here's Stephanie Palmer of Good in a Room here on the Film Trooper podcast. Hey, so here I am with Stephanie Palmer of Good in a Room, and I'm pretty excited that she even came on this podcast. I had a chance to listen to her the first time on Chris Ducker's podcast, and I had a chance to meet Chris just recently up here in the World Domination Summit in Portland, Oregon. But he was raving about his most favorite podcast interview he's done so far has been with you, Stephanie, by the way. I don't know if you know
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Because he was ecstatic to tell me, like, oh my, I can't do his accent, but he's like, oh, you've got to talk to Stephanie. Oh my gosh, amazing. So I was like, oh, in fact, I did. So let's get a selfie. So that's how I sent the selfie to you.
Perfect.
Just to let you know we were talking about you. So for those of you who, people that don't know who you are, can you give us a quick pitch of like who you are? Basically, where did you start in the film industry, and how did you end up starting a Good in a Room company in this book and a company that came off that book? So I'll sit back and let you tell us a quick story.
Sure. Well, I studied theater in college, and right out of college, I started as an intern on Titanic, was the first movie that I worked as an unpaid intern, and then worked my way up from getting coffee to being an assistant. And I was an assistant at Jerry Bruckheimer Films, so working on giant movies like Armageddon and Enemy of the State and Con Air. And then I moved to MGM, where I worked my way up through the executive ranks to become the story editor, and then to become the director of creative affairs, where my job was one of the small team of executives who would read screenplays that were submitted, hear pitches, and decide which projects we wanted to produce. So which screenplays we wanted to purchase and which movies we wanted to make. And then if I found a project, one of the great things about MGM that was unique at that time is that if you were the executive who found a project, that then you got to supervise it all the way through pre-production, production, post-production, and see the movie, through development until it was released.
How cool.
So that was a super experience that I would not trade for anything. But then after being an executive for a number of years, I got frustrated with the kinds of movies that we were making. And as much as there were aspects that I loved of being an executive, there were other things that were very frustrating, and I really wanted to work for myself because both my parents and my brother all had their own businesses at the time, so I knew what that lifestyle was like, and it was certainly different from my lifestyle as an executive where you're on call 24 hours a day and working every single weekend and every holiday. So I decided to go out on my own, and I really thought about what were the aspects of my executive job that I enjoyed the most, and that was absolutely working with writers. And so I thought, how could I make that be what I do on a daily basis? So I really designed the business around helping writers, particularly writers, but I certainly work with a lot of producers and directors, editors, other creative people, to help them sell themselves and sell their work. And so that's why I started Good in a Room. And it's been a really wonderful journey so far.
And you wrote the book, if I'm correct, 2008, is that correct? Mm-hmm. So it's been around for a while. And then when did the business part of it, the online business, start?
That really, although I've always had a website, it was extremely simple. And it was only until in the last few years, really about 2 years ago, that I started focusing on having an online business. And that really grew out of having a son, as we were talking about, and wanting to have more control over my time. And so I've really started to learn more about blogging and having an online business, and there's still so much more that I have to learn, but that has been one of my focuses over the last couple of years.
Oh, interesting. So I'm going to real quick backtrack to your first job in the industry, being working on Titanic. My ex-girlfriend was the stand-in for Kate Winslet.
Oh,
so
yeah?
I was down because I was in San Diego at the time. I was working at PlayStation. I was making movies for Sony PlayStation at the time.
Cool.
So I would drive down, visit her once in a while. Got to meet
On the set in Mexico?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess with her access, you get to meet all, I don't know. We were in a van with, Kathy Bates, going back to her hotel. But it's a strange thing because I think if you want to relay your interesting story, what your first job was to do on the job, because I have something to add to that after you're done.
Well, my first job, I did many interesting things, but of course I was fresh out of college and just really desperately wanted to do a great job and impress people because I knew, it was such a great opportunity to get to work on this giant, huge movie. And so I was asked to do all sorts of things, but one of the things that I was asked to do was to drive boxes of something that I was not to look at over the Mexican border. And partially, I'm sure they chose me because I looked so innocent, and I frankly was, and still kind of am. But that I didn't get caught driving whatever illegal material over the Mexican border. And so that was one of my many jobs.
Well, I can tell you what was in those boxes because I was on the receiving end.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Actually, it's just a vortex down there. I remember going down there, and it was like this weird sort of like debaucherous vortex.
Yes.
It was like, needless to say, like when that whole stint ended, it was like watching these people sort of decompress. Like because there were so many extras and so many other additional people that were literally living down there in Mexico because they had to be on call, thrown into the tanks, and the amount of sicknesses and ear infections, and it's just crazy. But it was amazing. I wonder if we actually probably bumped into each other because I was in like different offices all the time. So. So here's the thing I know that everybody, after they heard sort of your quick resume, would be like, oh my gosh, okay, you're teaching your writers, how to be good in a room. One of the things you teach in your book, which is a fantastic book, and your site. So two things that people have to do. One, buy your book. Two, sign up for your emails, because your emails are loaded with such valuable content and all that type of stuff. And one of the things you talk about are the 5 stages of the pitch. Can you kind of run over, I don't know if that's a word. Can you actually just go over what those 5 stages of the pitch are?
Sure. Well, when I was an executive, I heard more than 3,000 pitches and sat in more than 3,000 pitch meetings, way more than that probably, if I really counted. But I was really fascinated by why are some people really successful in selling projects? And it wasn't just based on one particular genre, like, for example, we're just buying comedies right now or just dramas. It really was across all genres and across all different types of people pitching. I was paying attention to why are some people really hitting it and other people are just flopping no matter what kind of project they're pitching. So I paid attention and basically analyzed that there were 5 stages of any successful pitch meeting. And that just like a screenplay, almost all screenplays have 3 acts. Pitch meetings go through 5 stages. And so the first stage is really that rapport building stage where you're getting to know the person, you're talking about something that's not specifically directly related to your project, and it's just a chance for people to say, who are you? Do I like you? Can we have a conversation? Just getting a sense of who you are. Then the second stage is information gathering, where you're asking some questions. The third stage is the pitch. That's the part where you actually describe what your project is about. Then the fourth stage is Q&A, question and answer. And this is the place where the most important part of the pitch meeting, this is where almost all sales are made. So the executive knows that you've come in prepared with how you're going to describe the project, your specific pitch, but they want to see how you handle question and answer. And then the fifth stage is just the close. And ideally, if everything has gone well ahead of time, the close is very easy.
And you mentioned too, like every pitch, you should have like one objective that you're going for, and that kind of sets it up. Can you kind of
Yes.
elaborate a little bit more about that?
Sure. So often people go into a meeting and they have so many different goals, like, oh, I hope that I can sell this project, and I hope they'll also recommend an agent to me, and I hope maybe we'll actually get to be great friends with this executive, and I hope that they'll consider me for another writing assignment. And it's like, well, once you have all of those goals, it's going to be really hard for any of them to be achieved. But it's much easier to keep it simple and say, well, which one of these can I achieve in this specific meeting, knowing that if a relationship goes well, you're going to have multiple meetings and it can develop. So what's the one thing, if you could only accomplish one thing in that meeting, is it just that you want to get a second meeting? Which is a perfectly reasonable, good goal for an initial meeting. It's
Right.
just, I want it to go well enough that they say, hey, when you have your next project, bring it in. Or, I have an idea for you. Let's talk about it. Can we set up another meeting for you to come back and meet my boss? I mean, those would be totally successful outcomes.
So basically, it just makes sure that you're not a douche, right?
Yes, but I think it's kind of thinking about it like dating. That so often, if you go on a first date and you're like, I'm gonna marry this person and have children with them, it's gonna kind of kill the vibe of that first date. That so often that same dynamic can happen because it's so hard to get a meeting with a decision maker, and people think this is my one chance to meet with this executive, so I've got to put everything in there.
Yeah.
And that can kill that vibe too.
Yeah, I had an experience like that pitching a movie years ago. Was able to get in front of a very prominent producer, well known, well respected, and everything led up to there where I felt like I built everything up. But I wish I had all this information prior, of course, but going into it, and not that it was ruined. Honestly, I realized all I was doing, I was selling my shoe design to a hat maker. Because, I mean, basically I had a comedy.
Yep.
He never made a comedy in his life, even though everybody told me that that's what he had like a special deal with a company that was a distribution company, and that they were looking for a comedy. And so they were like, yeah, this is it, man. This is it. And we get there. And the problem was he was the final say, and with his name on top of everything else.
Yes.
And if you look at his body of work, it was, he never made a comedy in this type of style ever. So it's one of those like, oh, okay, it was good exercise. Maybe I went a little over the top, but I could have totally used a lot of everything that you mentioned here, the 5 stages of a pitch meeting, just to make it a little, smoother. But now it's interesting because doing these podcast interviews, most of the time I just, get on and I just have like a conversation. But then the more I studied up on everything that you were teaching and everything that you're about with Good in a Room, I got a little nervous because like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. Now I have to feel like I have to apply these stages even in this podcast interview.
Oh, goodness. I am not judging at all in that way, I promise.
So here's the funny part. So I'm like, okay, number one, I knew about rapport. So we started off and I did my homework a little bit, kind of try to figure out like, hey, where are you living now? So I'm like, okay, so where do you live? And we're just trying to connect on a human level like you would if you're at a cocktail party or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then allowed you to, give your pitch, like real quick what your story was and listen. And then my next pitch, I guess the next stage would be I have to do the pitch. Now here's the fun part. I've heard you say this many times before, but I love for the listeners to hear it again. What is the one most important thing that you should have in your pitch? And this is specifically for filmmakers or, screenwriters. So now that we're on the third stage of the pitch.
I love this, very meta. It's great. You're doing beautifully. If you only learn one thing, it is in a pitch, especially a pitch about a movie or a TV show, a creative pitch, it is to lead with genre. It is so easy to assume as the creator of this project that the person listening who's hearing your idea for the first time will automatically assume that your project is, if it's a comedy, they're going to automatically get that it's a comedy, or if it's a drama, or if it's a thriller. But that is the most forgotten element that can easily send people down the wrong path. And so if you do nothing else, I literally mean lead with genre. Like, for example, my project is a comedy about blah, 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 blah. Or the title of my project is, and it's an action thriller about da, 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 da. because that specific word is gives so much information for the listener, and that's sort of what your entire idea hangs off of, the clarity of what genre your project fits in.
Perfect. You know, it's interesting. I've read a lot of different blogs, and they give like a little examples of, here's how to write the best log line, or get your synopsis ready, or how to get ready for a pitch, and so on. And I'm surprised even how many countless blogs and even books I've read, I don't see that as like the most important. And it's really fascinating because you're like, well, I've been on the other end listening to well over 3,000 pitches, and I can say that's really, really helpful. So thank you so much for sharing that. So the next part is, I definitely want people to check out your interview with that Chris Ducker did of yourself, because he does a great job of going over on your website, goodinaroom.com, that you have on your tagline, you're right underneath it, which is network, pitch, sell. And you don't have to go over everything you've done with Chris, but if you could you just give us like a teaser or a trailer of what that necessarily means when somebody comes to your site and becomes part of your community and signs up for your emails, what network, pitch, sell means to you?
Well, for me, networking is a crucial component of succeeding in Hollywood. And it's something that particularly writers often cringe at the thought, because most writers didn't decide to become writers because they wanted to be out there pitching and selling themselves and meeting strangers and, being a good salesperson. They want to be a writer because they're good at conveying their work in writing, often home alone by themselves. And so it's really helping even introverts network effectively, because that is, other than having the number one most important thing to succeed is to have the talent to be able to deliver in whatever your creative craft is. But the second most important skill is to be able to network and be good in a room. And so that's really the area that I focus on. Then pitching is definitely how you talk about yourself and your work in a clear, compelling way. And then selling is the sort of technical aspects of how ideas are sold, how projects are purchased, who are the right buyers for your project, who is the right agent for you. Those sort of business aspects are another portion of the material that I cover and that I help my clients with.
Oh, perfect. That's perfect. So here's the interesting thing. So we kind of reached sort of the halfway mark, and I'm glad we got over like all these sort of the main core of what Stephanie Palmer is all about in terms of Good in a Room. Now this is second half is for me selfishly. Now it's like just conversation, because I would really love to know, well, what are your thoughts about the future of Hollywood? Because there's two things. You worked in definitely in the Hollywood system, in the big studio system, and then there's a whole other sub-world of the independent film world. But I would love to just kind of get your take on what you think the future is with all the changes that have happened.
Well, I think there's huge growth that can still happen in the indie film world, whereas the studio system is shrinking in some way. But that the indie film world, there's so much more potential for growth, especially globally. So I think it's really exciting. I think, I know I'm not the first person to point out how access is so much more. I mean, you say it in your podcast and on your site of how much more possible and achievable it is for an individual to be able to create a film, for a reasonable budget that just has not existed in the past. And the amount of money necessary to do a quality production just keeps getting lower and lower. I think that's hugely exciting. And I think that the indie film world is what is available to the vast majority of creative people, of filmmakers. And so I think it's an amazing place to focus, because though there will always be, I think, the studio system, it's hard to penetrate. There's only a small portion of people who are involved in those projects. But the best way to get considered or to break in to the studio film world is to create your own independent film. So I think it's totally where it's at.
Oh, nice. Hold on for 1 second. My microphone is dropping. I'm going to make a bunch of noise as I switch this boom mic. Hold on. As we're talking, I'm like, wait, this thing's going down lower and lower and lower.
It's sagging.
I realized I was hunched over, and I'm like,
I've done that before.
well, you don't see him, like, oh gosh.
Why am I crunched over now?
Oh, yeah, now here's what's fascinating about it. You've been in the world of film at the highest levels, and now you have branched out on your own, and you are making a living for a few years and doing it very well. Giving value to a large audience of not just Hollywood screenwriters, but also business people in general, applying the techniques and practices that you've been teaching in Good in a Room to, like I said, to business people. And that's what's great about your book, because it doesn't just go into about just filmmakers and so on. I want to know, when did you kind of have the light bulb go off where you made the connect, like, wait a minute, these ideas could be used in a much broader audience outside of just filmmakers, but also business people?
Well, I knew that a lot of the techniques were very similar, just because I had done some public speaking and I'd spoken at the National Speakers Association, and a lot of people were saying, oh, this, it's so similar. But frankly, the only corporate jobs that I've ever had have been in Hollywood. I've never worked in it for a real company, out in the real world, other than in Hollywood. And so I felt like, well, how can I really know that I know that these techniques work in Hollywood because I've seen it and I've done it and I've proven it over and over, but I really don't have evidence that they work outside. And so I had an agent approached me about writing a book after he heard me interviewed on National Public Radio. And I thought, well, this is an amazing opportunity that I know doesn't happen every day. And he said, I don't care, even if you don't feel like you've tested these theories, you should write a proposal as if you have. And then after we sell it, you can go out and test your theories and make sure they really work. And I thought that was pretty ballsy, but I said, okay, I'm on board for that. Let's see if we can do it. And that's what happened.
Oh my gosh. And you know what? I can't wait till people get a chance to see this, the talk you gave at Google, because like your opening, first 10 minutes talking about how you went to New York for the book publisher and you were there and you were, the irony of I'm selling a book about being good in a room and being pitching. And then you were throwing a curveball. If you want to tell us a little bit about one of your first meetings, pitching a book idea, which I thought was fascinating.
Well, you would think that I would be totally prepared to pitch a book that's called Good in a Room and be really successful at pitching. But I was shocked. Actually, it's funny. I can't remember exactly what I shared in the Google Talk now, but I imagine that it was that when I went to the first publisher meeting with this big agent and this major publisher, that I came into the room and was sitting on the couch, and in came the editors to, interview me basically, that I just totally froze. And it was just so shocking to me that I was the writer sitting on the couch instead of the executive sitting behind the desk asking the questions. And I really was pretty terrible in the room. By the end I had kind of gotten it together and wasn't totally mortified, but it was not my best meeting. And so I went home that night and was just so embarrassed, and finally got my act together and followed my own advice. And then the following meetings, the next few days, were terrific, and it all worked out, but it was embarrassing.
What is that about just people in general of it's almost easier to give advice from a 3,000 view, whatever.
Oh, so view. Much easier to help someone else, yes, than yourself, because you're so close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got to stop and you got to go, okay, what would Stephanie say? So whatever it might be. This is what you would, if you could separate yourself, this is, because I have this thing too, as I'm, trying to expand Film Trooper, and I had to stop. And my wife is very good because her supportiveness is just straightforward bluntness. You need to stop doing this. You need to do this. You need to do this.
Well, and that's one of the hard things about having an online business is there are so many things you can do that it's really hard to not be overwhelmed.
Oh, gosh. And here's the interesting thing. You were talking about Hollywood. And I think what it is about Film Trooper is, the tagline is helping filmmakers become entrepreneurs, because we talked about the barrier to entry in terms of production has been that's not a barrier anymore because the digital tools make it so easy to anybody could do it, like myself. And then the distribution arm of the past year actually has been decimated because anybody can put anything up online, any digital good, a book, music, movies, and sell it directly to people all over the world instantly. So the last barrier is marketing. Being heard above all the noise and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting. And I don't know whether or not the future of film distribution for independents is going to change from a distribution type company versus to like all in-house like marketing company. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because I have an interesting thing like when I was trying to get my film made years ago in the old, in the old sort of the imploding system when the economy was crashing, everything was built around like the foreign pre-sales. So, you go to AFM, the American Film Market, or that market is the same market if you go to Cannes Film Market or the Singapore Film Market. It's the same people. They all just go there. So, this. I'm just I'm just saying. I'm assuming the people that don't know this, like, this is what I'm my wink to them is like, this is how it works. So it's fascinating because everything was based off like the foreign pre-sales. But I read an article that may be very interesting about once Netflix invades more of a global market, what happens to the pre-sales? I don't know. It's like once those like pre-built markets or whatever it is that they're counting on, I wonder if that's going to implode the old way of independent filmmaking, So
I sure think so. Ultimately, who knows when, but I sure think it would.
So then it's fascinating because I don't know, when did you learn about Pat Flynn and Chris Ducker? And in attending their San Diego one-day workshop event?
I can't remember. I mean, in the last 2 years, I had started reading Pat Flynn, I think, when I had various questions about what does this mean and how do I do that? And he has such an incredible site of resources written for the layperson like myself who is not a technical whiz to figure some of these things out, like what is keyword research or whatever the topic was.
Right.
How do I use WordPress? And then they had their first one-day business breakthrough, and I just thought I could really benefit from this because I'd never attended a online. I mean, I know it's a huge business, and there are tons of people who make their living this way, but I had never attended a workshop or a class in anything like this. And so I went to it. It was absolutely terrific. It was hilarious because I thought my website, which was very simple and plain, was fine, and it was ripped to shreds, and that was just what I needed. And so it was such a valuable experience for me to see all these other people who have successful online businesses, just how they focus them and what they do. I mean, just that there is this huge world available that I didn't even know because, I mean, I never even took a marketing class, or I don't have an MBA or any of these things that a lot of other people do. And so I've really had to take a lot of classes and learn, and I'm still learning. But it was terrific. And from there, I've kept in touch with both of them and learned a lot from them, and they've been terrific.
Oh, man, it's amazing. Once someone enters the world of like opening themselves up to the online entrepreneurs or bloggers or marketers, there's definitely, you can see the difference where you were mentioning like Hollywood, the way the structure is set up is that, only a very few amount of people get to play in that playground right now. And
Correct.
So what happens is like the old ways of doing things from film school on over 100 years of, an industry kind of growing into its own, it creates this sort of scarcity mindset because we're all sort of conditioned to think like you got to get here to get there, and and maybe you'll be that 1% that gets that magic ticket because that's what we live off of, all these blogs and stuff and articles. Is like we still refer to one or two hits that happen over the last few years, and that's what we refer to as like, well, this might be like one of those movies. This might be like I had Oren Peli on from Paranormal Activity, and he and I worked together at Sony, and so I had this conversation with him.
about like, wait, let's take me, step by step. And you could see so many unusual things that had to happen to make it happen. And you realize, like, I was living vicariously through them, like, oh my God, what is that like? Like your whole life just changed like one day, and it was fascinating. But when you go into the online world, the business world and the blogger world, there's this wonderful world of abundance. Like, you can go to Chris Ducker and learn a lot of the same things as you do if you go to Pat Flynn. But they work in tandem together, and they never feel like there's no competition. Each person is always, teaching each other. And it's amazing because it's like this weight lifted off your shoulders. And there's so much optimism and positivity going on in that world where, as you know, filmmakers, can be very, of all types, doesn't matter what part of the process you are in filmmaking, could be very cynical, and because they have that scarcity mindset. And so I'm trying to hopefully open up the minds, like, we got to let that go, because guess what? We actually have our artists, like you said, you work with a lot of artists, and that's what I want to ask you, because the difference between somebody creating art or something out of their mind or getting inspired because they had this itch to just, scratch to produce something, versus the online business world, which is they extract the information from an audience or a customer base, figure out what that problem is, and then try to solve that problem. So, both disciplines are coming at a different place. One's coming at from just like this burning desire to be expressive and push it out to the world, where the other one is extracting, pulling the information, and then being of service to their audience or their world. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were, because as you're seeing both, you're seeing both spectrums in your past career.
Well, I think one thing that I've seen, because even though I've worked exclusively on the really high-end, big-budget studio films, now that I have my own business, many of my clients are independent filmmakers. And I think that the people who have been really successful are those filmmakers who pay attention to marketing and pay attention to how are we going to figure out how to get money, find funding, and also find an audience, basically from the beginning of the process, not that they create the movie and then think, ooh, now how are we going to find an audience? But that's a component of their strategy from the beginning.
So yeah, good. Thank you for pointing that out, like seeing, the ones you're working with. Let me ask you, what is your thoughts about why filmmakers should become entrepreneurs? I mean, you kind of touched upon that, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more about what you're seeing, as you've applied your skill sets in both worlds.
Well, I think filmmakers the successful ones absolutely are entrepreneurs, in that they are the ones creating and generating. They're deciding which projects they're going to work on. They are focused on it. They are small business owners in a way. The vast majority are self-employed and have to deal with all of the challenges of not consistent income and self-employment taxes, all of those things of being self-employed, but that also they are the engine that runs their own company. And that's a very different thing than going to a job and having someone tell you, here's what we're going to do today. Do this list of 5 things, and then you can go home. It's just a totally different mindset. And so I think that the filmmakers who educate themselves on your site and other places as far as learning about marketing, distribution, how to create a successful pitch so that investors will want to invest with them rather than another project or someone else. I think those are hugely valuable skills. But I think it's terrific that these resources are available online, and that you don't have to go to traditional film school, even though that's great for many people, but it really isn't required.
No.
And a lot of these things, even at the best film schools, aren't really taught. You can learn great things at film school, but the actual, how do I get a movie made? How do I build my career so that I get paid more as my projects, how can I leverage what I've done previously to make a better deal? All of those things come from practice.
Yeah, definitely. I was at the World Domination Summit. I was here 2 weeks, and that's like a vortex of like just being high of like conquering the world,
Yes.
So
and the enthusiasm of being surrounded by all these other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and they're so positive, and like, so I had this an interesting story. So this is how I got to know Chris Ducker. I had actually tried to apply for his position on Fizzle.co with the guys, Corbett Barr.
I know them.
Yeah, so they're really funny and just energetic, but very successful. And so they had this post that said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to run our member success specialist," or whatever, their membership part of it. So, but I saw that the post, because what happened was I was listening to Chris Ducker's podcast and he was interviewing Caleb Wojcik, and they were talking about Fizzle. And then I finally checked out Fizzle, and then I realized I saw this post, but it was like almost like a month too late. So I'm like, they probably hired somebody. So it was on a Thursday. So then I spent that weekend putting together this ridiculous, like, my Hail Mary, like maybe I'll get a shot. So I bought a URL that said, "I want to work for Fizzle.co." Put together this ridiculous video. I put together this ridiculous video where I present myself, and then it cuts to like referring to, "This is how I found out," at Chris Ducker's podcast, and it cuts to this little flash animation I kind of put together of Chris Ducker as Patrick Stewart playing Professor X, and he's in a little wheelchair, and he's talking, the audio from the podcast, and then Caleb is this gigantic giant from the Twin Peaks series. So there's two bald guys talking to each other, but Caleb is so tall, so I just made him exaggerate tall. So as they're talking, and then I have like Pat Flynn come in, and he doesn't say anything. There's a little character on the bottom of the screen like walking in, and he turns around, and he's got this little backpack that says Filipino VA, and he walks off. And so it was like really ridiculous. Like I mean,
over the top, but look at you. I love it.
So I mean,
for it.
So needless to say, that was
props to you.
Thanks. So needless to say that I didn't get the position, because I turned in the I just sent them the link. I wrote them an email, and I said, everything you need to find about what you're asking for, my resume, my answers to your questions. And by the way, you didn't ask for it, but here's a video. I just sent them a link. So to show that I had commitment, I spent money, a few bucks to get a secure URL. I sent them that Monday morning. 2 hours later, they all wrote back just like ecstatic, like, "Oh my God, this thing's hilarious. Unfortunately, we just hired somebody last Thursday." But it got back to Chris Ducker, and he said, "Hey," he goes, "if the Fizzle guys aren't using you, let's meet up in World Domination Summit, because I have something to talk to you about." So I just kept in touch with them.
Perfect.
And so when I met up with them, I just happened to, we had other business stuff to talk about. So that's how we got the selfie. But at the same time, he was there with another entrepreneur who invited me to this party. But I kind of knew, overhearing who they're talking about, what party it was going to be. It was like a party of like all like your top online entrepreneurs. You had John Lee Dumas, you had Pat Flynn, you had, Chris Ducker would be there, the Fizzle guys would be there. I mean, Natalie Sisson, Jamie Tardy, all of them. So I was like, okay, here's another thing, trying to apply everything you taught about building rapport and networking. And you talked about networking VIP. Let's, real quick, I know we have like a few minutes here. Can you tell us a little bit more about networking VIPs in your process? And then I'll share you my story of how I sort of applied what your teachings were.
Sure. Well, to me, the more that you can really customize what you are, if you're networking to a VIP, the more that you have done your research ahead of time, the more you can make sure that your conversation is applicable and interesting, and that you're continuing to shine the light back on that VIP. So I call it 100% outward focus. Like if you're meeting someone for the first time, especially if it's someone that you admire or it makes you a little nervous, you want to make sure that you make a good impression. It can be very easy to just start talking a mile a minute or saying silly things just out of nervousness, totally normal. But I like to encourage you to have 100% outward focus, where you're really just totally listening really carefully to what the other person is saying, because in our world now, it is so common to not be focusing on the other person, to just be focusing on our own inner monologue of, ooh, do I have spinach in my teeth? What am I going to say next? What can I do? Blah, blah, blah. And you're not really listening. So it really stands out when you are the kind of person who can be there in their presence and just really pay attention and react in the moment.
Yeah, they definitely go, they also talk about, giving... Look at me pausing. Hold on. I'm going to cut this out as I get my thoughts together. They talk about looking to add value to somebody that you want to connect with, and not be somebody who's looking to take.
Take. Exactly.
Nope. Stop, take, and give. Because the more you give.
Especially at the beginning. Yes.
Right. So here I was at this opportunity to go to this party that I knew that was part of the, not part of the main conference. Like this is like away from the main event, and it was going to be exclusive because there's only so many people could fit up on top of this rooftop in Portland. So I got the address. I knew what time it was going to start. It was 6 o'clock. So I made sure to be like one of the first people there because I knew a lot of people would just show up late. But the main also, I knew that I needed to come gifts bearing, you know.
Yes, nice.
So I stopped by in Portland. There's 2 donut places. The famous one is Voodoo Donuts. Everybody,
yes,
that's
I've
more
heard
of a
of the
tourist
Voodoo. Yes.
Well, locally, that's sort of like more of a tourist attraction type thing. Because there's another donut place called Blue Star Donuts, which is this like gourmet type donuts, delicious. So I got a dozen of those Blue Star donuts. Headed over to the party. You know, there, you know, John Lee Dumas was, and a bunch of other people, just a few guys, you know, and I just walk in and I meet the guy who I met, who's friends with Chris Ducker's. His name is Greg Hickman. He runs mobilemix.com. And he was one of the speakers at Chris Ducker's tropical event he had. So I went in, I said, hey guys, you know, I'm so-and-so, and I said hi to Greg, and they were like, oh my God, look at his donuts. And I explained to him the difference between Voodoo Donuts and Blue Star Donuts. So right off the bat, you're in good places. And then there's a whole situation where all these people, like they had to escort everybody from this Airbnb they were renting out, because the actual rooftop you had to go through like this elevator and stuff like that. So it wasn't like direct access. So I offered, like, I'll stay up in front, you know, make sure everybody knows what to do, as they were escorting the first half of the group up. So because I was at the front, I get to meet everybody that was coming through, you know.
Perfect.
And at the same time, I finally met the Fizzle guys in person, because they had seen my video. So then when they walked in, they're like,
then they remembered. Nice. Yeah.
So they're like, oh, hey, you're that guy. So then you're at the party. Then you're just there and you're just mingling. And it was fascinating because I met so many smart people, and so many, you know, just listening and engaging. And it happened to be so that I knew that Chris Ducker the following night was having an event for his book, Virtual Freedom, because he's just killing it. He's like in this crazy book tour. You know, it's not going to end until like October.
I know. It's amazing.
It's amazing. So I happened to get a chance to meet the company at winningedits.com, Matt and Mindy, who were running sort of the event for him, you know. So I was able to get their information. So that day, I know I didn't have a ticket to the event. So I was like, okay. So I just texted Matt. I said, hey, great meeting you last night. Hope to meet you again tonight. I know Chris is having his event. I know it's a sold out event, but I'm here locally. If you need any help, let me know. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, we need help. So
beautiful. Look at you. Textbook. Nice.
So there I was applying what you're teaching in terms of networking VIP. I'm offering value to those who I value, that I would love to get to know better, but just be genuine about it. So I showed up and they needed help at the front door, because Mindy needed to run around taking photographs. And I couldn't believe that this whole event was going to be put on by 2 people.
Yes.
So I was like, they definitely needed help. So what the side effects, the benefits were, because I was at the front door, I got to see all these people coming through. I get to meet everybody, check them in, you know. So, you know, like I got my face seen, and I got to see everybody, you know, that came through, and just was there, just being supportive all the way through.
And you got to event, and you got to go there, and you really got to make a great impression on these 2 VIPs.
Yes, and that led to everything else that happened over the weekend. And I was one of those things like, oh my gosh. So then my job was to appropriately follow up. And you have a great thing in your book about the better ways to follow up. And I'll let people buy the book and read it. But, you know, I'm not going to give away the whole farm in this interview. So
no worries.
But it was applying your techniques definitely work. If you're in a place being genuine, and you're definitely there to try to offer value, and, you know, because, it definitely works, and you're not a taker, and that was huge. And I came away from the event just going, this is crazy. So, but I was ecstatic, because I did have this one thing I was asking Pat Flynn about. I said, at what point you guys made the decision, like, okay, I started a online business, and I was focusing on this setup, this is my audience. Like for my film troopers is independent filmmakers, and for yourself, Good in a Room is, writers and independent filmmakers. But we also see that the bigger pie is the world of business in general. Because everybody that's killing it online. So I'm at this party and I'm looking around going, oh, so that guy makes $200,000 a month on his blog. That guy makes $100,000 a month on his blog. That's a $50,000. Like these, it's just mind blowing, and it's like, this is crazy. But they're all servicing a larger audience base, which is the business world. And
Correct.
So I don't know, like I love when I was reading your book, like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. She's doing it. Like I'm like behind the scenes, like a cheerleader just saying, oh my gosh, this is so cool. She took her knowledge from Hollywood. She said, I'm switching over to be my own online business, but I'm also expanding this leverage I have out to the business world. And I'm going to help that group out there. And, guys, I'm just excited because I was like, I kind of needed like a mentor to look to, like, well, where do I take Film Trooper?
Well, you totally can. It's so funny especially if you're interested in doing public speaking, which you're a wonderful speaker. So I would definitely consider that, because I think that personally, once I had my son, I really didn't want to be on the speaker circuit. As much as that would be very lucrative, it would be a great way to continue expanding into the business world, because I did do that and had a number of major clients like Google and Merrill Lynch. And I spoke at a lot of major companies. And that's, the amount of money to be made in that business is way more than anything in the filmmaker world, for sure. But personally, I prefer working with filmmakers, and for this phase of life, didn't want to be on the road each week, traveling to different places and staying in hotels and not being with my son. And so I made the choice that even though, my bank account may not be as gigantic as it could be in other things, for me, that's not what's the most important. I want to be working with people that I care about and doing honest, good work and being able to have the time flexibility to be with my family. And those are the priorities that I've chosen at this phase. But there could be another time where I want to get back to traveling. And so then I may branch back out into doing more business. But that is absolutely a huge market that is waiting to be tapped.
Oh, yeah. And that's one of the last questions I want to ask you. Like, what is your vision for Good in a Room that you're willing to share? Or like,
Sure.
Where do you want to help?
I'm an open book.
Okay.
Well, I am really excited because I am continuing. I have one class that's an online class that's how to be a professional writer in Hollywood that really talks through and explains how people break in both to TV and to film and why they're very different. So for that person who wants to get paid, who wants to be in the Writers Guild, it explains exactly how to do it. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that is unfortunate and frustrating. And so this is my way of correcting and actually using statistics and specific examples of how people have used these techniques to get hired and build careers. And so that's been really exciting, but I have a bunch of other classes in the works. My next one will be about finding the right agent. And so I'm working hard to create the content that will answer people's questions in a way that they can access it from anywhere in the world, so that they don't have to be in Los Angeles, and that they can access this information for a reasonable price and get the legit, real information, not fluff and,
oh yeah,
a lot of what else is out there.
Oh, I'm ecstatic. I love what you've done. Everything, just like writing the book, setting up your business online, selling these particular products, because what you're doing is you're solving a problem. And I'm sure you've been able to extract those problems because you're very good in your email autorespond series of like asking those questions. And, and I'm out there, I have a small audience, but I'm trying to extract as much information. Like, well, how can I help you every week? Like, how can I help you? It's like, because I'm trying to figure out, like, am I on the right path here? Because because my wife is always like, well, has anybody done this, what you're doing? I go, well, kind of, not really. Well, I don't know.
But that's okay. I love your tagline, as long as you're continuing to get information. And I'm so glad that you admire what I have done, and I am so flattered. And I feel like I still have so much to learn. So I may just be a little bit ahead, but we both, we're on this journey to keep learning and trying different things and experimenting. And
oh yeah,
I do not in any way have all the answers, but I continue experimenting and trying and learning.
Well, I'm a fan for sure. So,
well, thanks.
And we can wrap it up because I'm about to hit the hour mark here, and I can't thank you enough for spending so much time just rapping with me. Absolutely.
It's my pleasure. Well, I think you're doing a fabulous job, and I'm thrilled that you have used the techniques and proven that worked, because I'm sure there were hundreds, if not, I don't know how many people went to the World Domination Summit.
Oh, yeah. It was thousands.
Well, thousands, right? So there were
thousands, but it
say there were
definitely over
1,000
people. Yeah.
Okay. And out of that 1,000 people, I bet a good portion of those would have liked to have gone to Chris Ducker's event, but couldn't afford it, didn't get in, it was sold out, they weren't invited, blah, 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 whatever. But you figured out a way. And anyone else there could have used that same technique, but you actually went ahead and did it and made such a great impression, reconnected with these people, met people multiple times so they got to see your face, like Caleb and the other Fizzle guys. And Chris Ducker, he definitely knows who you are. And remember, that's really impressive.
Yeah.
Super impressive.
Thank you. And so for those,
and you could have been in your hotel room or, at home, just being like, well, I missed it. Everyone's having this at this big event, networking, but here I am at home. But you did it,
Here's the funny part about it. I actually applied to be a volunteer for Chris Gilgaboo's The World Domination Summit. I figured that I'm local. I set aside all this time that I was going to be available for the event. And then like a month earlier, they're like, no, we've all filled up. We don't need your help. And it was not like that mean, but it was more like, we don't need it. We're cool. But if you want to still experience the summit, we have these offshoot one-offs that are not part of the main conference. Because I wasn't able to get the conference pass because it sold out so quickly. Because I didn't think I was going to need it, because I thought I was going to be a volunteer. So then I was like, I didn't get to be a volunteer, and I'm like, I didn't get the ticket. I'm like, oh no.
Right, here I am. This is the thing I want to go to.
Like, I'm right down the street, So, but they had these wonderful one-offs that they didn't have in the previous conventions or conferences. So I was able to go, and
even more impressive, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Here's something for you, just because you've worked with Pat Flynn. Because Pat Flynn is wonderful. If anybody who doesn't know Pat Flynn, if you get a chance, listen to his podcast. Every beginning of every podcast, he was able to throw a little fact about himself, a personal fact about things he liked. He's a huge fan of Back to the Future. But he also, one of his podcasts, he mentioned that he had a crush on Kelly Kapowski from Saved by the Bell, Tiffany Amber Thiessen. And who, what guy at our age didn't? So it was
the women too. I mean, I think she's beautiful, right?
So I knew that Chris Ducker and Pat Flynn and Darren Rouse, all these guys were being part of this pro blogger like one-day seminar. Like it was going to be like, so that was a Thursday before the big World Domination Summit. So I was able to get a ticket for that. Made sure I showed up early and made sure that I sat in the frickin' front row.
Perfect.
Just so that. The face.
Scott, I love it.
But on top of that, I was wearing a T-shirt that had Tiffany Amber Thiessen as Kelly Kapowski. So I did a selfie and tweeted it to Pat, and I go, dude, I don't know if you saw this, because I didn't get a really chance to meet him, but we were tweeting back and forth. He goes, dude, I saw you rocking that shirt. Awesome.
That's great.
So anyway, those are other tips.
Excuse me.
Right. So those are other tips to add on top of your networking.
That is great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll follow up you later as soon as this is all done, and I'll keep in touch. And like I said, I'm part of your email list, and I loved your book, and I actually have gone through it, and I bought the audio version too, which is great. And it's actually funny because both your podcasts on Chris Tucker and Jesse Eichmann's Business of Film, and your audiobook, I listened to it at double speed. So this is really the first time I've actually ever heard you speak in a regular tone.
That is hilarious. That is so funny. What do you know?
Well, there you go. Well, thank you. You have a wonderful, wonderful day. I've got to get cleaned up and ready for this audition. For this. All
right, we'll break a leg.
Thanks.
Break a leg.
Yeah, it's fun up here. it's totally mellow. I don't know how I ended up in Portland. I was from San Diego and spent a lot of time in LA, but we moved up here about 4 years ago, and I just started to get back into acting a couple of years ago. Then my daughter was older and I was older.
Yep, and you could.
Yeah, and I was like, what the hell? So
that's great.
Awesome. Well, enjoy your little boy. Was
Thank
he
you.
4 or 5? Oh my gosh.
4, almost 5. Yep.
That's just get as many hugs in as possible. I try to do it now, and my daughter's like, dude, this is really awkward. I'm 12.
Enough, right? Enough, Dad.
I was like, oh, you don't understand. You were so cute when you were so little.
I know.
Well, I enjoy your time, and I definitely hope to meet up in person one of these days.
Sounds great.
Do you ever get to Los Angeles or the?
I do frequently, and actually every year I do. I host the pitch conference at the American Film Market.
Oh, cool.
And so I think that's November 9th this year. So should you be attending the American Film Market or other people, please come on by and say hello.
Heck yeah.
And that's always a fun event where people get to pitch their projects and then get critique from me and Cassie and Elwes. And it's always a good time.
I love how you just sort of casually dropped Cassie and Elwes' name. He's like one of the most prominent independent producers around.
Right. Like where else do you get him, who has produced something like 278 movies, truly, and used to be the head of William Morris independent film. Like he critiques everybody's pitches right there on stage. So it's a pretty cool thing. And he gives the winner, at least the last couple of years, because this is now the 5th year that we've done it, that the last year he just said, okay, I'm going to give $500 from my personal checkbook to whoever has the best pitch. It was great.
Wow.
And he did. And he did it right there.
Wow. What was the pitch? Like 12 years a slave. No, just kidding.
No, it was a really great pitch. It was funny. It's really interesting each year how different the pitches are. So I'll be interested to see what this year holds.
Cool. So for everybody, again, that's the American Film Market in Santa Monica in November. Look for it. The Pitch Fest. Stephanie Palmer. Gosh, thank you so much for your time.
It is my pleasure. Thanks so much, Scott.
And that concludes my interview with Stephanie Palmer from Good in a Room. I encourage you to go over to see all the show notes over at filmtrooper.com/123 for number 123, which is episode number 123. And you can get a lot more information about Stephanie, sign up for her emails, get, maybe even hire her for consulting if you need to. She's amazing. So anyhow, again, that's at filmtrooper.com/123. If you like this interview, please think about leaving a ratings and review over in iTunes for me. Just go to filmtrooper.com/iTunes. That will take you to the iTunes page. And any ratings and review would be very, very helpful in spreading the word about this particular podcast. And of course, don't go away empty-handed, because I have a free gift for you over at freegearguide.com. It's an equipment list of everything I use to make a feature film for $500 without a crew. Again, that's at freegearguide.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.
Film Trooper, filmmaking freedom for the independent.